The Hartwell Conservatory of Music was not the kind of place where ordinary people walked in off the street. It was old, respected, and filled with the kind of silence that made you afraid to breathe too loud. The walls were lined with portraits of composers who had been dead for centuries. The floors were polished marble that reflected the light from chandeliers hanging high above. Everything about the building whispered one word: excellence. And somewhere in the middle of all that excellence, there was a 64-year-old man pushing a mop. His name was something most people at the conservatory had never bothered to learn. To them, he was simply the janitor, the quiet man in the gray uniform who showed up every evening around 6 and left sometime after midnight. He had been doing this job for 11 years. And in all that time, he had never caused any trouble. He did his work, kept his head down, and stayed out of everyone's way. But if you paid attention, really paid attention, you would notice something strange about him. Every night, after he finished mopping the main recital hall, he would stop, just for a moment. He would stand near the back of the room and look at the piano sitting on the stage. It was a Steinway Grand, worth more than most people's houses. Black and shining under the soft lights, he would stare at it the way some people stare at the ocean, like he was looking at something far away, something he could see but never touch. Then he would pick up his mop and move on to the next room. Nobody ever asked him about it. Why would they? He was just the janitor. On this particular evening in late October, something was different. The conservatory was hosting a private reception for its faculty members. About 24 professors had gathered in the recital hall after a long day of meetings and rehearsals. There was wine, cheese, and the kind of polite conversation that academics are so good at. They talked about upcoming concerts, difficult students, and the endless politics of running a music school. The janitor had been asked to finish his cleaning early so he would not disturb the event. He did as he was told. He worked quickly and quietly, staying in the corners and shadows where no one would notice him. By 8 o'clock, he was almost done. Just a few more things to put away, and he could leave them to their party. But as he gathered his supplies near the back entrance, something made him stop. The piano. It sat there on the stage, silent and waiting. The professors were all clustered on the other side of the room, deep in their conversations. No one was paying attention to the instrument. No one was paying attention to him. He stood there for a long moment, holding his mop like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His heart was beating faster than it should have been. His hands, rough and worn from years of hard work, were trembling slightly. He had not touched a piano in 37 years. 37 years. That was longer than some of these professors had been alive. It was a lifetime. It was a prison sentence served in silence. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the wine in the air, making everyone relaxed and careless. Maybe it was the way the light fell on the piano, making it glow like something from a dream. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he was just tired. Tired of watching. Tired of remembering. Tired of pretending that part of him had died when he knew, deep down, that it was still alive. He made a decision. Before he could talk himself out of it, he walked over to where the professors were standing. His legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. His mouth was dry. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. One of the professors noticed him approaching. She was a tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and she was the most respected piano instructor at the conservatory. She had trained concert pianists who now performed in the greatest halls in the world. When she looked at the janitor, her expression was not unkind. But it was clear she was wondering why he was interrupting. "Is there something you need?" she asked. The other professors turned to look. Some of them seemed annoyed. A few looked confused. One or two had the kind of expression that said they had already forgotten he existed and were surprised to be reminded. The janitor opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I was wondering," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "if it would be possible for me to play the piano. Just once. Just for a few minutes." Silence. The professors looked at each other. A few of them smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they are trying not to laugh. One man in the back actually chuckled out loud. "I am sorry," said a younger professor with a neatly trimmed beard. "Did you say you want to play the piano?" The janitor nodded. He could feel his face getting hot. He knew how this looked. A 64-year-old janitor asking to play a $200,000 instrument in front of some of the most accomplished musicians in the country. It was absurd. He knew that, but he asked anyway. "I understand if you say no," he added quickly. "I just thought I would ask. I have worked here a long time, and I have never touched it. I just wanted to know what it felt like." Just once. More silence. The younger professors exchanged glances that were not hard to read. This was going to be a story they told at dinner parties. The night the janitor asked to play the Steinway. But Professor Vance did not laugh. She studied the old man standing in front of her. She looked at his hands, cracked and calloused from years of cleaning. She looked at his eyes, and something in them made her pause. There was a depth there. A sadness that went beyond anything she could explain. "Do you know how to play?" she asked. "A little," he said. "It has been a long time." She considered this. Around her, the other professors waited. Some of them clearly expected her to send him away with a polite but firm refusal. That would be the sensible thing to do. The professional thing. But Eleanor Vance had not become the teacher she was by always doing the sensible thing. "I suppose," she said slowly. "A few minutes could not hurt." The janitor blinked. He had not expected her to say yes. "Really?" he asked. "Really," she said. "But please, be careful with it. That instrument is very valuable." "Yes, ma'am. I understand. Thank you." He turned and walked toward the stage. His footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet of the room. Every eye was on him now. The professors had stopped their conversations to watch. Some were curious. Most were amused. A few were already preparing their polite applause for whatever clumsy attempt was about to follow. The janitor climbed the 3 small steps to the stage. He walked over to the piano and stood beside it for a moment, just looking. Then, slowly, he pulled out the bench and sat down. He placed his hands on the keys, and in that moment, before he played a single note, something shifted in the room. The air itself seemed to change. It was like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The professors watched from across the room, wine glasses in hand, ready to be entertained by the janitor's foolishness. They had no idea what was coming. The janitor sat at the piano with his back straight and his eyes closed. For a few seconds, he did not move. He just breathed, in and out, slow and steady, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, gathering the courage to jump. The professors watched from across the room. A few of them whispered to each other behind their hands. One woman was already preparing a polite smile. The kind you give when someone tries their best but falls short. They expected nothing. Maybe a simple melody. Maybe a few clumsy chords. Something to humor the old man, before they could return to their wine and conversation. Then he began to play. The first notes came soft and low. A gentle ripple of sound that spread through the room like the first drops of rain before a storm. It was the opening of Chopin's Ballade. No. 1-inch G minor. One of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. A piece that took years to master. A piece that made careers and broke spirits. And this janitor, this invisible man in his gray uniform, was playing it like he had written it himself. The room went still. Professor Vance had been lifting her wineglass to her lips. She froze with it halfway there. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth fell open just slightly. She had heard this piece performed hundreds of times by students, professionals, and masters. She knew every note, every phrase, every breath of it. This was different. This was something she had never heard before. The janitor's hands moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible. His fingers, thick and rough from years of scrubbing floors and carrying heavy equipment, danced like they were made of light. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. Every note was exactly where it should be. But more than that, every note had meaning. Every note had feeling. The music built slowly, like a story being told without words. It spoke of loss and longing, of dreams that had been buried but never forgotten, of a heart that had been silent for too long and was finally being allowed to sing. Professor Vance's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody even looked at it. Every person in that room was frozen in place, their eyes fixed on the old man at the piano, the younger professor with the trimmed beard, the one who had almost laughed at the janitor's request, was standing with his mouth hanging open. His face had gone pale. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, and maybe he had, because what they were witnessing was not just a performance. It was a resurrection. It was watching something that had been dead come back to life right in front of their eyes. The janitor played on. His body swayed gently with the music. His eyes remained closed. He was not in that room anymore. He was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere far away from mops and buckets and polished floors. Somewhere he had not allowed himself to go in 37 years. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean. It was tender in some places, fierce in others. There were moments of such sweetness that it made your chest ache, and there were moments of such power that it felt like the walls themselves were shaking. One of the professors, a gray-haired man who taught music theory, had tears running down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. He did not even seem to notice them. Another professor, a woman who had performed at Carnegie Hall in her younger days, had pressed her hand over her heart. Her lips were trembling. This was not supposed to happen. This was not how the world worked. Janitors did not play Chopin like this. Old men in work uniforms did not sit down at Steinway Grands and produce sounds that could break your heart. And yet here it was, happening right in front of them. The piece moved into its final section. The music grew more intense. The janitor's hands flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost superhuman. But it was not cold or mechanical. It was alive. It was burning with an emotion that felt almost too big to contain. And then, the final chord. He struck it and held it, letting the sound ring out through the room. It hung in the air like something sacred, like the last word of a prayer. Then silence. Complete and total silence. The janitor sat there with his hand still on the keys. He did not move. He did not open his eyes. He was breathing hard, like a man who had just run a marathon, like a man who had just fought a battle. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Nobody could speak. The air in the room felt different, heavier, like something important had just happened and the world needed a minute to catch up. Professor Vance was the first to find her voice. "Who are you?" she whispered. It was barely louder than a breath, but in the silence of the room, everyone heard it. The janitor finally opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands, still resting on the keys. Those rough, worn hands that had spent decades pushing mops and carrying trash bags. Those hands that, for a few minutes, had just produced some of the most beautiful music any of them had ever heard. "I am just the janitor, ma'am," he said quietly. His voice was tired, old, full of something that sounded like grief. Professor Vance shook her head. She walked toward the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The other professors parted to let her through, still too stunned to do anything else. "No," she said as she climbed the steps to the stage. "No, you are not just a janitor. I have been teaching piano for 40 years. I have trained concert pianists. I have heard the best in the world play on the greatest stages in the world. What you just did." She stopped a few feet from him, searching for the right words. "What you just did was mastery," she said. "That was not someone playing the piano. That was someone speaking through it. Where did you study? Who taught you? Why are you here cleaning floors when you could be?" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The other professors had begun to gather at the edge of the stage. The amusement was gone from their faces. The condescension had vanished. In its place was something like awe and confusion, and a desperate need to understand what they had just witnessed. The janitor looked up at them. All these important people in their expensive clothes with their impressive titles. All these experts who had spent their lives studying music. They were looking at him now like he was the most fascinating thing they had ever seen. He was not used to being looked at like that. He was used to being invisible. "It is a long story," he said. "We have time," Professor Vance replied. The janitor was quiet for a moment. He looked back at the piano. His reflection stared back at him from its polished black surface. An old man. A nobody. A ghost who had just, for a few precious minutes, remembered what it felt like to be alive. "My mother taught me," he said finally. "She was the one who first put my hands on the keys. I was 5 years old." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked just slightly. "She told me I had a gift. She said God had given me something special. And for a long time, I believed her." Professor Vance sat down on the edge of the stage, her eyes never leaving his face. "What happened?" she asked softly. The janitor let out a long, slow breath. He looked like a man about to open a door he had kept locked for a very long time. "Life happened," he said. "Life happened. And I had to make a choice." The room was silent, waiting, and slowly, he began to tell them his story. The janitor sat in silence for a moment, gathering his thoughts. The professors waited. Nobody rushed him. Nobody looked at their watches or reached for their phones. Whatever this man was about to say, they knew it was important. He took a deep breath and began. "I grew up poor," he said. "Not the kind of poor where you complain about not having the newest shoes. The kind of poor where you wonder if there will be dinner tonight. We lived in a small apartment in a rough part of the city. My father worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. My mother stayed home to take care of me and my 2 younger brothers." He paused, a faint smile crossing his face. "But we had a piano, an old upright that my grandmother had left to my mother when she passed. It was scratched and worn and probably out of tune. But to my mother, it was the most precious thing in the world. She used to play it every evening after dinner. Nothing fancy. Just simple songs. Hymns mostly. But when she played, everything else seemed to disappear. The bills on the table, the noise from the street outside, all of it just faded away." Professor Vance nodded slowly, picturing the scene in her mind. "One day, when I was about 5 years old, I climbed up onto the bench next to her. She was playing something soft and slow. I do not even remember what it was, but I remember reaching out and pressing one of the keys, just one note. And the sound it made," he shook his head, like he was still amazed by the memory. "It was like magic to me. I had never felt anything like it." My mother looked at me, and she smiled. Then she took my hands and placed them on the keys. She showed me how to play a simple chord, C major, the most basic chord there is. But when I played it, when I heard those 3 notes ring out together, something happened inside me. It was like a door opened, a door I did not even know was there." The professors listened in complete silence. Even the ones who had been skeptical before were now hanging on every word. "My mother saw it," the janitor continued. "She saw something in my face that day. And from that moment on, she made it her mission to teach me everything she knew. Every evening, after she finished cooking and cleaning and taking care of my brothers, she would sit with me at that old piano, for hours sometimes, teaching me scales, teaching me songs, teaching me how to read music." He looked down at his hands again. "I learned fast, faster than she expected. Within a year, I was playing pieces that had taken her months to learn. Within 2 years, I was playing things she could not play at all. She used to sit beside me and just watch with tears in her eyes. She kept saying that God had given me a gift, that I was meant for something special." Professor Vance leaned forward. "Did you ever have formal training?" she asked. The janitor nodded. "When I was 8, my mother heard about a church on the other side of the city that had a real music program. A retired concert pianist taught lessons there for free to kids who could not afford them. My mother took 3 buses every Saturday morning to get me there. 3 buses, each way. She would sit in the back of the church and wait for 2 hours while I had my lesson. Then we would take those 3 buses home again." He smiled, but there was pain in it. "That teacher. He changed my life. He saw what my mother saw. He said I had something rare, something that could not be taught. He pushed me harder than anyone ever had. He made me practice until my fingers bled. And I loved every minute of it. One of the younger professors spoke up. What happened next? Did you go to a music school? The janitor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. When I was 16, something incredible happened. I was invited to audition for a scholarship at one of the best music schools in the country. My teacher had arranged it. He believed in me that much. So, my mother scraped together enough money for bus tickets, and we traveled overnight to get there. I was so nervous I could barely breathe. But when I sat down at that piano, everything else disappeared, just like it always did. He closed his eyes, remembering. I played for almost an hour. Chopin, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff. When I finished, the judges just sat there staring at me. One of them, an older woman with gray hair, she stood up and started clapping. Then the others joined in. They told me right there, on the spot, that I had earned a full scholarship, everything paid for, tuition, room, board, everything. They said I had a future. They said I could be one of the greats. Professor Vance felt her heart tighten. She already knew this story did not have a happy ending. My mother cried the whole bus ride home. The janitor said, happy tears. She kept hugging me and telling me how proud she was. When we got back to our apartment, she took the letter they had given me and put it in a frame. She hung it above the piano. She said it was proof that dreams come true if you work hard enough and believe. He stopped. His jaw tightened. The professors could see him struggling to continue. What happened? Professor Vance asked gently. The janitor did not answer right away. He just sat there, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes distant. 3 months before I was supposed to leave for school, my father collapsed at work. They rushed him to the hospital. The doctor said his heart was failing. He needed surgery, expensive surgery, the kind of surgery that poor families cannot afford. The room was completely silent now. You could hear the faint hum of the lights overhead. We did not have insurance. We did not have savings. We had nothing. My mother tried everything. She begged. She borrowed. She prayed. But it was not enough. It was never going to be enough. He swallowed hard. I was 17 years old. I was supposed to leave for music school in 12 weeks. But my father was dying, and my 2 younger brothers were too small to work. My mother could not do it alone. Someone had to step up. Someone had to provide. Professor Vance closed her eyes. She understood now. So you gave up the scholarship, she said quietly. The janitor nodded slowly. I got a job at a factory. 12-hour shifts. 6 days a week. Every penny I earned went to my father's medical bills. I told myself it was only temporary. I told myself I would go back to music when things got better. His voice cracked. But things did not get better. My father survived the surgery. But he could never work again. The bills kept coming. My brothers needed food, clothes, school supplies. There was always something. Always another reason why I could not leave, and the years just slipped away. Capit. He looked around at the professors. These people who had dedicated their lives to music. 17 became 20, 20 became 30, 30 became 40, and somewhere along the way, I stopped telling myself I would go back. I stopped believing it was possible. I just accepted it. This was my life now. Working, providing, surviving. The music was gone. Professor Vance wiped a tear from her cheek. Several other professors were doing the same. I have not touched a piano in 37 years, the janitor said. Not once. I could not bring myself to do it. It hurt too much. Every time I saw a piano, I felt like I was looking at a grave. A grave for the person I used to be, the person I was supposed to become. He looked up at them, and his eyes were wet. I took this job 5 years ago because I wanted to be near the music again. Even if I could not play it myself, I wanted to hear it. I wanted to feel it in the walls. I wanted to remember what it was like to have a dream, even if that dream was dead. Professor Vance reached out and put her hand on his arm. "It is not dead," she said firmly. "What I heard tonight was not dead. It was more alive than anything I have heard in years." The janitor looked at her, and for the first time, something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Why tonight?" she asked. "After all these years, why did you finally ask to play?" He let out a long, tired breath. "Because I am retiring next month," he said. 65 years old. Time to go. And I thought, maybe just once before I leave, I could feel it again. Just one more time. Professor Vance stood up. She looked at her colleagues, then back at the old man sitting at the piano. "I think," she said slowly, "that we need to make a phone call." The janitor did not understand what was happening. Professor Vance had stepped away from the stage and was speaking rapidly into her phone. Her voice was urgent, excited. She kept gesturing with her free hand as she talked. Other professors had gathered around her, listening to her end of the conversation with wide eyes. He sat alone at the piano, feeling exposed and confused. A few minutes ago, he had been invisible. Just the old man who mopped the floors. Now everyone was looking at him like he was some kind of miracle. It made him uncomfortable. He was not used to being seen. Part of him wanted to get up and walk away, to grab his mop and his bucket, and disappear back into the shadows where he belonged. This was a mistake. He should never have asked to play. He should have kept his head down like he always did, and let the past stay buried where it belonged. But another part of him, a part he had forgotten existed, felt something strange stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize what it was. Hope. He had not felt hope in a very long time. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope had hurt him before. It had built him up just to knock him down. He was not sure he could survive that again. Professor Vance finished her call and walked back to the stage. Her eyes were bright with purpose. "I just spoke with the director of the conservatory," she said. "I woke him up, but I do not think he minds. He is on his way here right now." The janitor shook his head. "Ma'am, that is not necessary. I did not mean to cause any trouble. I should go." "Go?" She almost laughed. "You are not going anywhere. Do you have any idea what just happened here tonight?" He looked at her, uncertain. "What happened?" she continued. "Is that I just witnessed one of the most extraordinary things I have ever seen in my 40 years of teaching music. A man who has not touched a piano in nearly 4 decades, sat down and played Chopin like he was born for it. That does not just happen. That is not normal. I am just out of practice," he said quietly. "I made mistakes. I know I did." Professor Vance stared at him like he had just said something insane. "Mistakes," she repeated. "You made a few tiny mistakes in one of the most technically demanding pieces ever composed. After not playing for 37 years, and you think that matters?" She shook her head in disbelief. "Most concert pianists who practice every single day cannot play it as well as you just did." The janitor did not know what to say. He had lived so long believing that his talent was gone, that the years of silence had erased whatever gift he once had. He had told himself that story so many times that he believed it completely. But maybe the story was wrong. Over the next hour, the recital hall began to fill with people. The director arrived first, a tall man in his 60s, who looked like he had thrown on clothes in a hurry. Professor Vance pulled him aside and spoke to him in hushed tones. The janitor watched the director's face change from skepticism to confusion, to something like shock. Then more people started showing up. Other faculty members who had received late-night phone calls. A few graduate students who lived nearby. Someone had posted something on social media, and now there were even strangers arriving, curious about what was happening. The janitor felt overwhelmed. This was too much. Too fast. He was just a cleaning man. He did not belong in the center of all this attention. He tried to slip away, but Professor Vance caught his arm. "Where do you think you are going?" she asked. "This is all very kind," he said. "But I think there has been some misunderstanding. I am not a performer. I am not anyone special. I just wanted to play one time before I retired. That is all. I did not want any of this." Professor Vance looked at him for a long moment. Her expression softened. "Can I tell you something?" she said. He nodded. I have been teaching at this conservatory for 23 years. In that time, I have worked with hundreds of students. Some of them were talented. Some of them were hard-working. A few of them were both. But real genius? The kind of gift that comes along once in a generation? I have seen that exactly twice in my entire career. She paused. Tonight was the third time. The janitor felt his throat tighten. He wanted to argue with her. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. But the look in her eyes told him she meant every word. You have spent 37 years believing that your dream died, she said gently. You have spent 37 years punishing yourself for a choice you made when you were just a boy, trying to save his family. But I am telling you right now, what I heard tonight was not the sound of something dead. It was the sound of something that has been waiting for you to come back to it. The janitor felt tears building in his eyes. He blinked them back, but it was no use. They spilled down his cheeks, and he did not try to stop them. I do not know if I can do this, he whispered. Do what? Any of this, he gestured at the crowded room. Play for people. Be looked at. I have been invisible for so long. I do not know how to be anything else. Professor Vance smiled. It was a kind smile, full of understanding. You do not have to decide anything tonight, she said. But I want you to know that doors are opening for you. Doors you probably thought were closed forever. All you have to do is be brave enough to walk through them. The director approached them, his expression serious but warm. I have heard quite a bit about you in the last hour, he said to the janitor. Professor Vance tells me you have been working here for 11 years, and none of us had any idea what you could do. I did not think it mattered, the janitor said. It matters, the director replied firmly. It matters very much. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I would like to offer you an opportunity. Nothing you have to accept tonight, but I want you to think about it. The janitor waited. Tomorrow evening, we have a recital scheduled in this hall. Our students will be performing for an audience of about 200 people. Parents, alumni, donors, members of the community. I would like to add your name to the program. The janitor's eyes went wide. You want me to perform? In front of 200 people? I want to give you the chance, the director said. The chance you should have had 47 years ago. The chance that was taken from you. The janitor's hands were shaking. His mind was racing. This was crazy. He was 64 years old. He had not performed for an audience since he was a teenager. He would embarrass himself. He would freeze. He would fail. But then another thought crept in. A quieter thought. A thought that sounded like his mother's voice from long ago. You have a gift. God gave you something special. He thought about his mother. She was 91 years old now, living in a nursing home about an hour away. Her memory was fading, but she still recognized him when he visited. She still held his hand and asked him if he was happy. He always told her yes, but they both knew it was a lie. What would she say if she could see him now? What would she say if she knew he finally had another chance? He already knew the answer. She would tell him to take it. She would tell him to stop being afraid. She would tell him that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be. The janitor looked at the director, then at Professor Vance, then at all the people who had gathered in this hall on a random night just to see him. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said. His voice was shaking, but the word was clear. I will do it. Professor Vance broke into a smile. The director nodded with satisfaction. And somewhere in the crowd, someone started to clap. Then another person joined in. And another, until the whole room was applauding. The janitor stood there in the middle of it all, tears streaming down his face, feeling something he had not felt in 37 years. He felt like himself again, but the hardest part was still to come. Tomorrow night, he would have to prove that his gift was still alive. He would have to face an audience and show them what he could do. And deep down, despite everything that had happened tonight, he was terrified. Because what if he failed? What if this was all just a beautiful dream that would turn into a nightmare the moment he stepped onto that stage? He would not know until tomorrow. And tomorrow was coming fast. The janitor did not sleep that night. He lay in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What had he agreed to? What was he thinking? He was 64 years old. He had not performed in front of an audience since he was a teenager. And now he was supposed to walk onto a stage and play for 200 strangers like it was nothing? He thought about calling the conservatory in the morning and telling them he had changed his mind. That would be the safe thing to do. The smart thing. He could go back to being invisible. He could retire quietly and spend his remaining years in peace. But every time he reached for that thought, another one pushed it away. His mother's face. He had called her that morning, just to hear her voice. She did not know what had happened. He had not told her yet. They talked about small things. The weather. The food at the nursing home. Whether the nurses were being kind to her. Before he hung up, she said something that hit him like a punch to the chest. "I dreamed about you last night," she said, her voice thin and tired. "You were playing the piano. You were young again. And you were playing. And everyone was listening. It was so beautiful." He had to cover the phone so she would not hear him crying. That dream. She still had that dream. Even after all these years. Even after everything that had happened. She still believed in him. How could he let her down now? The next evening came faster than he expected. Before he knew it, he was standing backstage at the conservatory, wearing a borrowed suit that did not quite fit. His hands were trembling. His mouth was dry. He could hear the audience on the other side of the curtain, hundreds of voices blending into a low hum of conversation. Professor Vance found him in the corner, looking like he might be sick. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. She smiled. "Good." He shook his head. "What if I fail? What if I get out there and forget everything? What if I make a fool of myself in front of all those people?" Professor Vance put her hand on his shoulder. "Let me tell you something," she said. "Every great performer I have ever known has felt exactly what you are feeling right now. The fear never goes away. But the great ones learn to use it. They take that fear and turn it into fuel. They let it push them instead of holding them back." She looked him in the eyes. "You have been waiting 37 years for this moment. Do not let fear steal it from you." The janitor took a deep breath. Then another. He thought about his mother. He thought about that old upright piano in their tiny apartment. He thought about the little boy who fell in love with music and the young man who gave it all up to save his family. That young man had made a sacrifice, a noble sacrifice. But maybe, just maybe, the sacrifice did not have to be forever. The stage manager appeared and told him it was time. The janitor walked toward the stage. Each step felt heavy, like he was walking through water. The curtain parted, and suddenly he was in the light. The audience stretched out before him, row after row of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some just waiting to see what would happen. He walked to the piano, the same Steinway he had played the night before. It sat there gleaming under the stage lights, waiting for him like an old friend. He sat down on the bench. The room went quiet. 200 people holding their breath. For a moment, he just sat there. His hands hovered over the keys, not touching them. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Then he closed his eyes. And he was not on a stage anymore. He was back in that tiny apartment, sitting next to his mother. He could smell her perfume. He could feel her warmth beside him. He could hear her voice, soft and encouraging. "Play for me, baby. Show me what you can do." He began to play. The music poured out of him like water from a broken dam. All the years of silence, all the pain, all the longing, it all came flooding out through his fingers and into the keys. He played Chopin. He played Rachmaninoff. He played Beethoven. And then he played something else. Something no one had ever heard before. A piece he had composed in his head over 37 years of pushing mops and scrubbing floors. A piece he had never written down because he thought no one would ever hear it. A piece that told the story of a boy who loved music, a man who lost everything, and an old janitor who finally found his way back home. The audience sat in stunned silence. In the front row, Professor Vance had tears streaming down her face. The director was leaning forward in his seat, his mouth slightly open. Students who had spent years studying music were watching with wide eyes, realizing they were witnessing something they would remember for the rest of their lives. The janitor played for almost an hour. He did not plan it that way. He just could not stop. The music kept coming, wave after wave, like it had been building up inside him for decades, and finally had somewhere to go. When he finally played the last note, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted. People jumped to their feet. The applause was deafening. It rolled over him like thunder, filling the hall, shaking the walls. Some people were cheering. Some were crying. Some were doing both at the same time. The standing ovation lasted 11 minutes. The janitor sat at the piano, overwhelmed. He did not know what to do. He had never experienced anything like this. He just sat there with tears running down his face, while hundreds of strangers showed him more love than he had felt in 37 years. After the concert, everything happened very fast. The director offered him an honorary position at the conservatory, a private studio, an invitation to teach master classes to advanced students. A student had recorded his performance on their phone and posted it online. Within hours, it had been viewed thousands of times. By the next morning, it had gone viral. Millions of people around the world were watching an old janitor play the piano like his life depended on it. News stations wanted interviews. Music magazines wanted profiles. Concert halls wanted to book him for performances. But the janitor did not care about any of that. There was only one thing he wanted to do. The next afternoon, he drove to the nursing home where his mother lived. He walked down the familiar hallway, past the nurses who smiled and waved, and into her small room. She was sitting in her chair by the window, looking out at the garden. When she heard him come in, she turned and smiled. "There you are," she said. "I was wondering when you would visit." He pulled up a chair and sat beside her. He took her wrinkled hand in his. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking, "I have something to tell you." She looked at him with those old, wise eyes that had seen so much. "I played again," he said. "After all these years, I finally played again." She did not say anything for a moment. She just looked at him. And then, slowly, a tear rolled down her cheek. "I know," she whispered. "I always knew you would." She squeezed his hand. "My boy," she said. "My beautiful, talented boy. You made me so proud. You always made me proud. Even when you stopped playing. Even when you gave it all up. I was proud of you every single day." The janitor broke down. He put his head in her lap and cried like he had not cried since he was a child. All the years of sacrifice. All the years of silence. All the years of believing he had lost himself forever. His mother stroked his gray hair with her thin, gentle fingers. "It is never too late," she said softly. "It is never too late to become who you were meant to be." And sitting there in that small room, holding his mother's hand, the janitor finally understood. He had spent 37 years believing his dream was dead. He had spent 37 years mourning a future that never happened. But the dream was not dead. It had just been sleeping, waiting, patient and quiet, like a seed buried in the ground. And now, at last, it had bloomed. He was not just a janitor anymore. He was not invisible anymore. He was exactly who he was always supposed to be. A man who made music. A man who made people feel. A man who proved that no matter how long the silence lasts, the song never really ends. It just waits for you to be ready to play it again.